They gave their alms, and they showed up for church, and they showed up for sacrifices, and they brought the lamb, but it had no effect in their lives at all. And that bothered them, and God could see that. And so, he saw that, and he's kneeling in the temple along with God. So when Uriah dies, as I said last week, when Uriah died after 52 years, Uriah was the kind of man that brought security. And as long as Uriah was living, he felt that there was some security with God, because Uzziah had a relationship with God, and he felt as long as Uzziah was living, that things was okay, but all of a sudden he died. When Jerry Falwell died, what's going to happen to his empire? When Jack Howes died, what's going to happen to his empire? When Lee Robinson died, what's going to happen to his empire? So people get used to having one person, and they say, well, what happens when he dies? I said, he's still going to be there. Well, Uriah died. Uzziah died. And so he really begins that we are in trouble. So he goes to the temple to pray. Now, it's interesting. It used to be that the church doors were never locked. Our church was never locked. I always hated that, because at 2 o'clock when the police came by and found the church unlocked, they would call me. I hated that. The church is unlocked, preacher. Really? When's the last time it was broken in? But people could go into the church and pray. We had a man he died within a year when I was there, and he was senile. He lost his memory. But when he would leave the house, and they didn't know where he was at. You know where he was at? On the back seat of the pew of the church, because he was there. He was there from the time he was established, and that's where he knew to go. He stayed in the church. And there was a time that the church was open to go to pray, not to steal the auto sound or to steal the computers and so forth, to break into the box or something. So he's kneeling in the temple along with God, and his mind occupied the spiritual thoughts of God, and asking, maybe, am I devout enough to stand up to protest against the nation's sin? One moment silence and still, next a blaze of glory and bursting of song takes place. As we saw in the first 2 or 3 verses of Isaiah chapter 6, he was startled. I mean, if you're in a church service and you're in the temple, and all of a sudden you see all these cherubim show up, you see these angels show up, you see the sparkling images. He went into a vision. A vision is not a dream. A vision is it's real as it can be. You're there. You haven't moved anywhere, but the vision is so clear that you're actually seeing it. I think it's what John the Beloved saw in Revelation. He saw the vision. He actually saw what he wrote, and more than likely, Isaiah saw the description that we saw in these verses. He actually saw the cherubim. He actually saw the presence of the angels and the Shekinah glory of God in essence. And I reckon that was probably an earth-shaking event. Would you think? If you come to the temple depressed and all of a sudden the angels show up, wouldn't it be cool? I mean, wouldn't that knock you off your feet? And wouldn't it knock you to your knees? And knock you to your face? And he found himself confronted with the sublime and the dazzling spectacular. This vision traveled up in light and finds itself resting for a moment, and only for a moment. He is seeing. I don't know if I watched enough Star Trek, and they would always try to show the enlightenment. That you advance to the enlightenment, and they tried to show the person that was enlightenment was light, and it was like it was light. going this way. It was like the vision of a light. And I kept thinking, yeah, they must have got that from the Bible, because the essence of it was brilliant light. And that's how I kind of picture Christ in these angels. And so the revelation is but for a moment. Only for a moment. Short and powerful, depth, and takes a long time to grasp. There are some things that you can see in a moment that takes a long time to understand. There's one thought that God can give you in your head, and I'm trying to explain the thought in my head. The thought shoots through my head in about 3 seconds. And I'm going to try to describe to you what my thought is. For one word that God puts in my mind, it takes 1,000 human words to bring it out. Because I'm trying to express in human terms what God has put in my mind, and He condenses it so short that I'm trying to describe it. Because when God speaks, He don't waste words. He don't stutter. And when He gets in you, and sometimes to translate it out to what He wants you to say is very difficult to get out in words. And but here's what He said: Holy, 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 Lord of hosts. The whole earth is filled full of His glory. Holy, holy, holy. I wish I could spend a sermon on that. 3 times He mentions it. And He believed me, this temple pillars shook to its foundation. And it says His train filled the temple. His train filled the temple. So, what we see in this marvelous text is that the vision of the Lord, the King, in verses 1 through 4. And the vision reacts upon the mind of the prophet in his relationship to the King, verses 5 and 6. The idea is, when you see God, you don't want to run down to the People's Magazine or all those magazines and sell your story. That's not what he did. That brought him into a relationship with God. When you see God, the idea is not to impress you. The idea is what effect is it going to have on you. How's it going to change you? It's not about being something fantastic, but how is it going to change your relationship with God? We see that in verses 5 and 6. Altogether, new sensations filled his mind. Something happened to his mind. Something changed his ideas. Something automatically just grasped his attention. It got his attention. You don't look at it the same way twice. Once you see God, you don't look at things twice. You don't see it that way. Before you saw it this way, now you see it this way. You have a different complex. When you see, I mean, we've had those kind of experiences when we see something. You know, what event have you seen in your lifetime that it's still part of your consciousness? You might have seen a wreck. You might have seen the death of a friend. You might have experienced something so drastic in your life that it has affected how you live the rest of your life. It's so impressed your mind, good or bad, and that it changes your life forever. And I see this all the time with people that go to war. We got a person on our street, Roger, whatever his name is, and he is a basket case, bless his heart. And I think you probably understand that, not a basket case, but you get married to her. But anyway, what I'm saying is he has flashbacks, and his experience, he's never going to be the same, because he's experienced something. And when you see God in that sense, it's going to impress upon you in a big sense. And then the service which he had to perform, verses 8 through 10, was it. So God brings about the call, He brings about the relationship, He brings about the vision, and then He calls him, and he's ready for the call. And the effect of the vision of Christ's lordship on this beholder. The effect, I want to give you 3 things. The effect of the vision of Christ's lordship on the beholder. What effect is it going to have on them? If you've seen God, and you've seen a vision of God, and people tell us this all the time. By the way, I don't believe it. People, in other words, the two best-selling books in the last years or so, it's been this young boy that died and went to heaven. You know, he was 6 years old. You know, he had a ghost writer that wrote the book in his stead and put things in there that he thought that the little 3-year boy said. And none of that, you know, here's my comment, and I'll say it out. No one has ever died and gone to heaven and come back. The only person that's done that is the Apostle Paul, and he didn't want to sell his story. Now, did they have a vision of some sort? I've got one of my best friends, and just recently he said, I'm telling you, he said, you know, my good friend, and, you know, and he said, I can tell you, I went to hell and I smelt the smothering smoke of hell, and I went to the portal gates of heaven. And he was out for 22 minutes. He was dead for 22 minutes, he said. And I'm not going to argue with him. Something happened in that time, but he certainly didn't go to hell, and he certainly didn't go to heaven. And he would argue with me if I said that he did, so I don't argue with him.
When I had that seizure, I don't remember going into it. I mean, I don't know if I was still breathing or not. I don't remember.
Well, I think you can dream a lot.
I didn't.
And
I don't remember that I actually went anyplace. Because I don't even remember even having the seizure.
But it sells good books, and people like to know something. Yeah, I
But I
understand.
just remember waking up and there was a house full of people. But
Now, if that had happened, let me give you the effects. If that happened, this is what happens to Isaiah. Number one, if you have a vision of the vision that Isaiah had of the Lordship of Jesus Christ, and you saw holy, holy, holy. Number one, a deep sense of personal sinfulness. A deep sense of personal sinfulness. When you see what God does, He reveals Himself. And you see yourself in sinfulness that you've never seen before. That's what he saw. Who am I that you should sin? He saw his sinfulness. And God uses people who see their sinfulness